What's up, guys? Let me try to run you through this modifying an XML process. It sounds more tedious than it is. It's not as difficult as you think it's going to be. Just take your time, look for patterns, and you'll figure it out really quick. So the topic on hand was MIDI, so let's deal with that. We're going to go to shortcuts and edit MIDI. And I'm just going to use these toggles right here for some stage flow looks. There's a little plug for Stage Flow. Go check it out. It's amazing. I'm gonna right click and hit new note shortcut. You can obviously, if you have a controller, click on this. I don't have a controller connected, so this is what I'm doing. So here is 4 shortcuts. Let me offset these um, notes real quick so we can discern between them. There we go. Okay, cool. So right here we have an off value. Off is 1. You can set that to 1, whatever you want. On, let's set this to like 26. And we'll just do the same thing on all of these except for the last one, just so we can see what's going on. And here's the last one. I'm going to set the on value of this last one to 64, which should be closer to 8.5. And I'll explain what that means here in just a second. So actually, I'll just do it right now. So the velocity out is 0 to 127. If you've been doing this for a while, you understand MIDI uses 0 to 127 for channel values. What the XML is using is a float, which would be the same thing as if you're going to, let's say, like an OSC and you click on like your video fader here. Right here, notice it says float 0 to 1. So what that's doing is 0 is off, 1 is on. Anything in between as a decimal value is going to be your decimal place. For MIDI, going back to MIDI, it's going to be instead of 0 to 1, it's 0 to 127. So, like, how can you figure this out? A really quick way that I would recommend would be just open up Wire. It comes free with Arena and Avenue. It does come watermarked, but you can still use it as a tool. So we're going to go input. We're going to use a int in, which is short for integer. We do not want it to have a max. And then if you double click and just type in the word map, and then connect the outlet of this to the inlet of the map, what we're wanting to do is remap a value. So we're going to remap 0 to 1 to be 0 to 127. That's your MIDI value. So 0 to 127. And that's going to remap the value to a 0 to 1 float. So we just did 64 for this guy right here. 64. So when we hop into our XML in a second, if we come back here and we type in 64, then hover our mouse over this, it's going to say 0.503937. So basically 0.5. Um, so it's just a really quick way to figure out what your float value needs to be to correspond with the MIDI velocity value right here. So let's say you wanted it to be MIDI velocity 16. You would just type in the number 16 right here, and then that would tell you to use value 0.1259. So now that we know how to convert between a 0 to 127 for MIDI to a 0 to 1 float for XML, let's dive into the XML. To get to the XML, just go to your documents, Resolume Arena. You're going to go to shortcuts, MIDI, and I made the infamous error of not naming my mapping file, which is going to really bite you if you don't do that. So let's go back into MIDI shortcuts. MIDI, right now it's set to default. That's a no-no. Don't ever do that. Let's hit save as, and let's call this test. Cool. Now we have a actual name associated with this. If you make a change in the XML, you'll actually need to close Resolume and then reopen it for it to reflect. So let's do that. Let's close Resolume. And if you notice, we have a test file now. And I'm using a program called Sublime Text. It really does a good job of keeping things formatted and just all in all, just a great IDE to use. So find your shortcuts. You're looking for a title or a header right here called shortcut, and then the footer or the end of this is also going to say shortcut. So from shortcut to shortcut, so right here, shortcut, where it starts with the name, ends with shortcut. That is an entire uh, MIDI mapping value right here. This whole thing is. And then to quickly reference it, if you just look where it says path, it's telling you exactly what you're mapping, just as if you're doing an OSC. This is the same thing. This is the address of what you are trying to map via MIDI. Then right at the bottom right here, it has an off and an on. These are your off and on values right here. So notice how we did 1 instead of 0. So instead of it being a perfectly 0, we now have this giant long float number, which translates to just being value 1 when you're going between 0 and 127 on MIDI. So if we set all of these guys back to a 0, when we reopen Arena and go to test uh, the mapping file, all those should now be 0 instead of 1 where they were originally. And same with these, instead of it being 127, let's do these as a solid value of 1, which is now going to be 127 instead of 126. And then this very last one right here, remember we did 64 and we said the number was 0.503. Well, there it is. So if we change this back to a point, I think it was like 129, that should get us closer to like the 12-13 range, I believe. So from here, just hit Control S to save. So all we did was just modify the on and off velocity values just right here at the very bottom of the shortcut. So it should be the third and fourth from the bottom lines on this. And then obviously as if you're mapping more things that have more parameters, such as like a clip where it has states for connected, disconnected, disconnected but previewing, connected and previewing. You're going to obviously have more than just an on and off. You'll actually have those parameters exposed as well. And that's where you would edit these parameters. So right where it says named values, this is where you're actually making your LED modifications on MIDI. So we save this, Control S, close it. Let's open up Arena. I believe once you make a change to the XML, you'll actually have to go back and then connect that to your composition. So go to Edit MIDI. It should show default, so we need to go back to test. And if we look at these here, you can notice our off value is now set to 0 and not 1, and our on value is back to 127, not to 126. And if we look at this last one, it's on value 16 because we changed that value closer to that number to reflect that. We close out of this again, open this up, then change this value right here back to like a 0.5. Control S to save, close out. We should be back to 64 on that output velocity. So we're going to shortcuts MIDI. Again, we need to choose the file we needed to because we modified it. And now if we click on this last one on the on value, it should be 64. There it is, 64. So in a nutshell, that is how you modify a XML.